So I'm pretty sure you guys know this already, but of course, Monopoly has been around since like the crack of dawn, and there's different variations of this, like different special versions. Like one time I had like a Family Guy version, but there's also like a Super Mario version, and there's like all these different kinds of versions and shit. But then there's also like completely different games like Monopoly Deal, Monopoly Jackpot. But I think the original one still holds up. And a lot of people complain, saying that it can go on forever. But I think that is honestly one of the best parts about Monopoly. The only thing with Monopoly is what's interesting to me about this is that it not only requires a bit of strategy, but it also comes down to luck too, because it really depends on what you land on, what you get. So it's all about probability when you're rolling the dice. But also you got to be smart about your properties. You got to be smart about buying houses, hotels, who you do business with. So this is kind of like dealing with real life shit, I've been playing Monopoly for years now. I don't consider myself to be a champion or anything, but I played it enough to know some tips and tricks that will help you win almost every single time. So I'm going to go and open this up and let's dive right in. So this is pretty much where luck comes into play, because on the dice you can roll anywhere from a 2 to 12. And if you look at the probability chart, you'll notice that 7 is the number in which you'll most likely get when rolling the dice. And basically, the farther the number is spread out from 7, the chances of you getting that number is going to be less. So let's look at it more realistically on the board. So if I get a 7, which is probably going to be the most likely, I might land on a chance from go. But also, you might get like a 6, 8, or 9, which are pretty close to the number 7. So I might land on these light blue properties. So what's going to be a little less likely is if I get anywhere besides these spaces. So reading railroad, income tax, and vice versa. Another good spot is, let's say if I'm on just visiting. Right, so remember 7 is going to be the number that I might most likely get. So in which case I probably land on community chest most likely if I'm here. But also the numbers that are closer to 7 are going to be 6, 8, and 9. So the chances of you landing on these are going to be pretty high compared to landing on, Kentucky or maybe a chance or anywhere else. And that's not to say you're going to get numbers between 6 to 9 every single time, but as far as probability is concerned, it's the chances of it are going to be much higher than pretty much any other number on the board. So what I like to do is I like to think that I'm pretty much anywhere. Let's say, I don't know, randomly I'm at like electric company. So from here to free parking, that's, 8 spaces. So I know some people like to bend the rules a little bit. So let's say I threw, $1 in free parking. And I'm thinking, all right, I'm rolling the dice, and I get a 5. So even though 5 isn't really as common, but the probability still exists that, hey, I'm gonna land a 5. So let's roll again, and I get a 9. So remember, 9 is very close to the number 7. So that puts me in Kentucky and vice versa. So most likely you might get an 8, and you might get a free $1 from free parking. Yay! Now the next tip I have is to buy every single property on the board. So that includes railroads, utilities, because those will add up to your assets, and therefore you can actually make a profit out of what you buy. And that's the point of the game, is for you to buy as many properties as you can. Let's say, all right, I got an 8. Ooh, Vermont Avenue, $100. All right, I'm taking that. So, $100. Now I got Vermont. So, if you take a look at Vermont, so you'll see if it focuses. So even though I might not make as much now as far as, paying rent, but if I get all 3 colors, and I start building houses, I can potentially make a lot more out of the $100 that I originally paid for the property. So that's why it's important to buy everything on the board. Now, you may not think that utilities are really that important because honestly, they're the least profitable out of anything you buy in the game. But it just goes to show that you can potentially make, more than 150 bucks from other players, since that's how much each utility costs. But potentially you can make anywhere from, I don't know, $4 to $120. So even though that's not a lot of money, but if you think about how many players are going to land on either of these, that's still money in your pocket at the end of the day. Railroads, don't sleep on these. These are actually one of the best properties you can buy in the game. And although they're not as profitable as houses and hotels, these are still killer early game. And buying one and somebody landing on these, they already owe you like $25. And the cool thing is that if you get like a chance or community chest card and you have to land on one of these, you're gonna have to pay double the amount here. So you can make up to 400 bucks. And the other thing too is that you can actually mortgage these for $100. So these actually are still very profitable, which is why I love railroads. And not only that, but since they're in each corner of the board in the middle, your chances of landing on those are gonna be pretty high. So that's why it's important to buy every single property in the game. That's going to make it harder for the other players, and you're going to enjoy a lot more success, and your chances of winning are going to be much higher than versus somebody who has just Boardwalk and Park Place. Look, I understand this is like the most expensive row, but you got to like buy everything else on the board, because that's your key to winning. All right, my third tip to winning Monopoly is by taking advantage of the jail spaces. Now, let's be honest, jail is not exactly fun. Of course, I'm not the type of person that's volunteering to go to jail, or anyone else for that matter. But in actuality, jail can actually be beneficial and key for your winning. What? So in the beginning of the game, if you ever land in jail, bail out as soon as possible. I'm telling you, pay the $50. If you have to get out of jail free card, use it right away and start buying properties. Continue to buy as much as you can because you don't want your opponents to want to buying more and more properties, and then that becomes harder for you to secure properties. Therefore, you're gonna have to trade with them, and things can be a lot more difficult there. Now, let's just say it's later in the game and you have like houses and hotels and like various different spots. So you're pretty much already making tons of profit. So later in the game, you're actually sitting in jail. And it's actually better if you do sit in jail because let's say your opponent is out in the open and let's say he gets a 12. So, he lands in New York. That's like $1,000 rent. That can be money that you can make while sitting in jail. And, paying $50 to get out is like next to nothing because, $1,000 is way more than, it's only like a percentage of getting out of jail. All right, so tip number 4 I have is to take advantage of the number of houses and hotels that are available in the bank. Now, I thought there was actually 32 that came with this, but for some reason I have a total of 34 houses. And, but anyway, that's besides the point. So in order to build hotels, you have to have at least 4 houses before upgrading, which is cool, of course, then because buying hotels makes a lot of sense because it makes you the most profit. But if you own a bunch of properties around the board and you have houses all over, your chances of your opponent being able to build more and more houses are going to be pretty slim because they don't have anything to build off of. And they need to have 4 houses on each property before they upgrade to a hotel. Now, whether you want to bend the rules and just be like, all right, well, I'm going to upgrade straight to a hotel, you can probably do that. But general rules of Monopoly is you got to have houses first before you build your hotels. And by you taking advantage of all the houses that are available, again, your opponent can't really win or do anything The only downside to the strategy is if you either get a chance or a community chest card, you might have to pay for each individual house that you own. So if you get one of those cards, just be careful. But other than that, if you do see the opportunity to buy every single house and you know your opponent's not going to be buying houses or hotels anytime soon, then this is a perfect strategy. Also, one thing I forgot to mention is as soon as you get a monopoly, you want to try and get 3 houses on each as soon as possible. Now, if you take a look at this, this is New York. So you see that you're not really paying as much if you have like 1 or 2 houses, but the 3rd house is where you really get the most profit. So there, your rent jumps up dramatically. Now, some people might suggest that if you don't have the money, you could just buy a house as soon as you get a monopoly. And that's definitely true too, because that will, build up on your assets and therefore you can potentially make more money. Sometimes what I like to do is if my opponent is close by and I know that because of the probability of the dice that it's most likely that my opponent's going to land on my property, I go ahead and build a house right then and there, right before my opponent's next turn, and chances of him landing on it are going to be pretty high. All right, and the last tip I have is when it comes to trading can be a little tricky. So I'm going to try to explain this as best as I can. So there might be situations where you might have 2 out of the 3 color sets, and then you only have like 1 yellow or something like that. And your opponent is pretty much in the same predicament, except kind of reversed, sorta. So basically, you have something that your opponent wants, your opponent has something that you want. So you're gonna have to make a compromise, but the question is how you're gonna do that. So obviously, your opponent's gonna think that it's gonna be more beneficial to take the more expensive properties, which are the yellow ones, and for you to have purple, because they're the least expensive and they're less profitable. So my answer to that is just because something is more profitable doesn't exactly mean that you might even win the game. So one thing I pay attention to is I pay attention to what my opponent has as far as other properties, how much money my opponent has. Because for example, if my opponent had more money than I did and I didn't really have a lot of money to start building properties, and I agree to give him the yellow property in exchange for the purple ones, and then he has the more expensive properties, then he can start building houses right away, and I'm pretty much already in trouble, because I don't have anything to build off of yet. But now let's just say, all right, well, he didn't have a lot of money, he didn't have any other monopolies around the board, and I decided, all right, well, I'm going to give him the yellow one, so he has all the yellow ones, and he's going to give me purple, so I have all the purple ones. I had the money to start building, he doesn't. Then guess what? Chances of me winning are going to be much higher than my opponent's, because now I'm able to start building houses, and if I had enough money, like I explained earlier, I can build 3 houses, significantly increasing the amount of profit that I get when my opponent lands on my properties. When doing trades, just be mindful of what your opponent has already and what you can get out of it versus what your opponent gets out of it. But keep in mind though that trades can be pretty difficult, especially if you're playing with somebody else. Somebody may not agree that this is the way to go about things, vice versa, or people are just stubborn. For example, I don't want to give up Boardwalk because it's the most expensive property of the game. But again, Boardwalk and Park Place, these two, you're not going to land on these that often. But is there a chance you will? Absolutely. But remember to always judge the opponent's financial situation every time you initiate a trade or they're initiating a trade with you. Alright, you guys, and my last tip, which is technically a bonus tip, is to really customize the rules to your liking, because Monopoly is designed to be really friendly when it comes to bending the rules. For example, I never played auctions just because I myself am not a good auctioneer. Other rules can be passing by go once around the board before being able to buy anything, or putting money in the free parking and making that space the jackpot space. Also, if you don't have anyone to play with, kind of like myself, you can technically run out and get a console version of Monopoly. And there are tons of console versions. For example, the one for the NES, which came out in 1992, is actually one of my favorite versions. I think it's just because of the game's pacing and just the way everything is. And it's just so simplistic compared to the other versions, I don't know. But of course, if you have like a PS1, PS2, like any retro game console, or you might have a PC, or you might have a PS5 or Switch or whatever, there's versions everywhere. So if you guys want some practice, you can actually play online with somebody, or you can just play against the computer, just to kind of see how it is. And it'll really get you some practice, because you never know. If you do have a friend over, you get a girlfriend someday or whatever, you might be able to bring her over and you guys can chop it up with some Monopoly, and you can be whooping her ass all night long. You're gonna find in a lot of these console versions that each and every one of them have like different settings that you can choose to really customize the gameplay to your own liking. So for example, if you just want to get an idea to see what the board looks like, or if you want to give somebody a certain amount of cash, assign property. But the really cool thing I like about this one is they actually have like pre-built games in here. So these kind of like divide the properties, give you like different amount of cash to start out with, and vice versa. But I also like the Windows 95 version too, because it even gives you more options, and these are actually different than that of the NES game and pretty much any other version. Basically, like different versions have different options you can set. For this one, they let you set the free parking to where you can collect the fines, much like in real life, the way that I like to play it. And then you don't necessarily have to have auctions and stuff like that. So, definitely experiment with different versions, give them a try, see how you like them, see which one fits best for you. Like I said, for me personally, I like the NES version the best. This one's pretty okay. It's not necessarily my favorite. This one is on Windows 98. But but of course, like I said, try different versions, see which feels best for you. And as always, I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.